Hello, welcome to Hedgehog Naval Academy. Today, in this kind of lesson, we're actually going to cover how to play Armada, Kings of War Armada. If you've played Black Seas and you've followed the first three lessons in our series, you already have kind of a foundation to compare this game. So instead of having a separate series of how to play Armada, I'm going to actually run this one video to kind of talk through the similarities and differences. So you can use the regular Black Seas series of lessons as a foundation to build on for this particular game, because it's very, very similar. You might even say it sort of uses the same rule set, but there are several key differences. So today we're going to go through that. Okay, let's kind of begin with going over the components, because the components are very, very familiar if you play Black Seas, but there are some key differences that we'll want to highlight before we actually get into the rules of the game. All right, so let's take a look quickly at these various components. Well, let's just start with the parts that come in the punch-out sets, because this is a lot of the game pieces that are important for playing the game. That does come with terrain. You have activation tokens here, this helm. Then you have tokens to mark your speed. This is anchored. Then you'll have arrows with two arrows on it. That shows that's actually battle, whereas this is steady with the one arrow. The ones here with three are full speed. So that you'll put those, instead of using wake markers, they use those little arrows. Now, you'll see this when we get to the ship cards, but there's all these numbered tokens, and numbered tokens are used here to record damage. You actually put these damage tokens on your ship, whereas in Black Seas you subtract from the total. Here you add from 0 up to the structure points on your ship to determine what goes wrong. You've got these little lettered tokens, and that's to help identify different ships. Very useful. Oh, but also to strike when you surrender, you get a white flag token put on your ship. They do have upgrade counters, just as in Black Seas. You'll have different upgrades you can put to your ships. The purple here are magical, and these are standard, the green. This is the fire token, so your ship is actually on fire. That's just like in Armada. The terrain has, these are two-sided sets. The terrain has, there's your sandbars. On the back are rocky outcrops. Here you've got, kind of an island shoreline. Two different versions of it. Now this is what's interesting. Here is the movement template. 0 to 8. I don't know of any 8-speed ships yet, but that's just for now. This is the wind rose. Now the wind rose used a little differently. You don't actually have a counter that points in the direction. You put the wind rose in the corner or side of the table from which the wind is coming. So the wind rose moves on the table, as opposed to having an arrow on the wind rose pointing in direction. So you set it north, south, east, west, and then if the wind's coming out of the west, you put it to the left side of the table. East, coming to the east, right side of the table. That would be the southeast, or the lower right corner, upper right corner. It's really kind of simple. Because remember, in this game, the basic rules I'll get to in a little bit. The wind determines, just like in Black Seas, the activation order, and so by putting this in the location, it's a lot easier to visually know where that's coming in. Now, it's a huge turn gauge compared to the one that's in Black Seas, but that's because when you turn, you don't just put the stern of the ship, you put the whole base to the ship. I'll show you those in a second, and you turn the base. We'll go ahead and do that now. I'll show you to actually execute a turn. The base of the ship would be placed here, and then you would line it up against this. I'll go ahead and punch this out. Might as well. So here we go. I've got my ships. This again, yellow and red turn gauge, just like in Black Seas. You're going to have some ships can turn farther than others. You place the ships the turn gauge up against the back of the ship, and you simply move the base until it reaches the side. So that's how you do a turn. Nice and positive lock. You know that you haven't shifted or turned, because in Black Seas it goes against the side of the hull. The hull can, is curved. You can get some variation there. So I kind of like the base idea here. All right, so that's simple. What's also interesting is they have this cannon template. This goes on the front of or rear of the ship's base to determine and give you a gauge for the firing arc. Okay, nice and simple. The firing arc for the broadside is perpendicular to the side, so you can actually run a for the whole length of the base. You can actually run a straight edge up against the base, and you'll know your broadsides extend, how far they extend. And this gives you the cone of fire for your bow or stern guns. Okay. Alrighty. So let's take a quick look at the ship cards and the ship models. So here's, for reference, this is a ship card from Black Seas for the frigate or 5th rate. Well, this is a typical card for Armada. How much bigger it is, but it has a lot of the same information. Okay, it has the turn gauge that it uses, red or yellow. Okay, just like in Black Seas, it has the cannon types, the heavy, the light, and it could have, they call it close quarters. And in close quarter will look like this instead of the carronade in the Black Seas. You'll also have an indirect fire weapon, for example, a mortar, and those will be marked with the IDW letters. So, again, some ships will have that, others won't. Very easy to tell. Now, the lower right left-hand corner, you'll see either an M or S. That's the size. So, small ship, medium ship. The bottom will tell you the kind of ship it is, the category. It's either support or main battle. There's the main battle. Okay. And over to the right, you have this big circle, and that's where your damage counters go. So let's start at the top. The move, that's the rate of, it's basically the rate of knots, like Black Seas would have. Now you have your structure points and nerve. That's very similar to Black Seas, except here you count up. So you have 28 hull points, and you accumulate your damage counters here until you reach or exceed 28. At that point, the ship sinks. The nerve piece, the counter or number, is kind of the indicator of crippled ships. I'll get in that a little bit. So when your damage counter total here exceeds the nerve, your ship is crippled. You might surrender. We'll talk about that in the rules to come. Then there's a crew size here. This is actually tells you how many dice you use in your boarding action, irrespective of the actual hull points. You can actually lose crew size separate from your hull points, structure points. So that's the basically rundown of the card. And what's neat is up here, that is the 12. That's the point value of the ships. So unlike having to look it up in a book, you've got it on your cards, your fleet cards. Will all have, here's a 30-point ship. There's a 12-point ship. There's a 16-point ship. And you just add those together to come up with your point totals for your fleet. Okay. Some additional cards in here are specific to the actual faction. So like here we've got the Basilian fleet rules. There's special rules that these will have, these ships. Here's additional, there's several that they actually get. Okay. So that's specific to Basilians. The Orcs have a different set. You'll also get a card that'll tell you additional special standard ship upgrades or magical upgrades available only to those factions. And special captains. These are like unique ships, if you will, available to that particular faction. And what's interesting is they actually give you, for each faction, a nice laser cut markers for the different special upgrades and for the special characters. So that's really the extent of the components. Well, let's take a look at the actual ship models real quick. Okay, I'm going to grab a base, and what's nice about these Basilians, have a very characteristic cog or carrack look. Here's another version. Here's a caravel looking version. Now, just to put it in perspective, that's how you mount it on the base, and the broadside is the full length of the base, not the hull. Let's compare this to a Black Sea ship. Now, this is a frigate. You can see they're much, much bigger. I mean, bulkier, right? Even the smaller ship here, this is a small ship, okay? Whereas it's a gun brig, whereas these two are medium, and a frigate is considered medium in Black Seas, and a brig is actually much thinner than this, probably a little bit a little bit shorter than this, I think. Matter of fact, let me quickly get a brig, and we can actually compare that. Yeah, so there's the brig. Brig is actually a little bit smaller, and much, much smaller from a hull perspective. So, you know, the difference between a small and large model-wise isn't that great. But the rule changes are the same. The rule effects in the game are the same, which we'll go over in a second. Okay, so those are the components. Overall, casting qualities, you know, these are all resin. Sails and details are all resin. So super will be needed to put them together. Some of them will come with a little bit of warpage there. So, but again, hot water should straighten it out pretty well. One thing you'll have to be careful of, I've noticed that in some of these, like here for example, let's see if we can show this. Yeah, from the back, you can see this is an orc ship. You can see that angle. It looks like it's been shaved, slightly wrong angle here. Now, I don't think that's such a bad thing for an orc ship, because when it sits on the ground, or on the table, sorry, it's going to look like it's listing slightly to one side, which is a very dynamic thing for a ship to do. I think it'll look okay, but note that that may be the case in some of the ships you get. As a note, in this kit I did receive actually an extra gun brig of a slightly different, lighter colored resin, but it was really, there was a lot of flaws in it. Take a look at the rear, just the rear panels. You can see how crisp the detail is on the gray resin. The white resin, it's all muted, and I mean, it really looks bad. And even on the hull and the side, it looks really bad. So fortunately, I was in the kit. I got a good copy. You get one of the gun brig, two of these gun panthers, I think they're called, and one LOI. I believe that's how it works. It's hard to tell. Until I have them built, it's going to be hard for me to kind of keep track of which one's which. But you get 4 ships on each side. There are 4 orcs and 4 Basilians. Alright, before we go into the actual rules, let's take a close look at one additional piece of these ship cards. Not every ship card has it, but some of them have special rules listed. This one has Halo of Light for the LOI, or Ram. 2 of them, there's a Hammer Fist and the Blood Runner, both have Ram. One is Ram 2, one's Ram 1. Now, each fleet comes with their own special rule cards, and on there it'll actually tell you what the Ram rule means. Okay, and like here, Halo of Light. If the ship is upgraded with the Aegis shield, add +1 to the amount of damage that is reduced. So there's small changes to the abilities the ship gets. It doesn't really seem to affect a lot here. I mean, look, when it comes to Ram, if it attempts a collision, it always fails its evade test, and will do. The target ship can evade, but they can't use a +1 modifier. But the orc ship will do damage plus the number on the card. So the Hammer Fist will do 2 additional damage. The Blood Runner will do 1 additional damage. That's what that'll basically be. And in addition, after a collision, the ship can immediately attempt to grapple in boarding action, which isn't normally how it's allowed. But so again, special ability, right? There's also some of them have. Here's an ensnared. Now, neither of these ships have this ensnared special ability, but it is here obviously for future ships that are being released. Okay, so a little bit of extra detail on the ship cards, special rules that may apply specifically to certain ships within a fleet. All right, so let's take a look at the rules. Okay, with that as a kind of foundation, you can see quite a few of the components are very, very similar. A lot of these rules are going to feel the same, but there's some key differences. And to be honest with you, if you play Black Seas, you might struggle a little bit when you play this game because of the differences are very subtle. And so much of it is the same. So let's just kind of start with the normal game and walk through the different components, or not components, but the different parts of the game turn and see where the differences lie. For this, I'm going to consult my notes, and I'll need my glasses. So, all right, the turn sequence is really the same. You check for the wind direction, then you activate your ships in order of the wind. Okay, same as in Black Seas. The big difference, though, in the wind change is you don't have a change in wind speed, just wind direction. And it's more likely to change in this game than in Black Seas. So here on a 2 through 4 or a 10 through 12, the wind changes direction one step to clockwise or counterclockwise, as opposed to 2 through 3 or 11 and 12 in Black Seas. Okay, but very simple rule: 2d6, make the change. All right, the wind, though, in the basic game, the only thing the wind does is determine who goes first. It has no bearing on your speed at all. They do include at the end of the rule set a full wind rules, which would kind of correspond to the advanced rules perspective of Black Seas. However, what happens there is when you get to the full wind rules, they actually introduce the basic wind rules of Black Seas. So the direction with which you face into the wind or away from the wind determines the max speed at which your ship can go, just like in the basic Black Seas game. But again, that's only if you wish to include the full wind rules. Okay, I recommend it because it just adds more flavor. The one thing that is included in this particular game, because it is fantasy, is oars and steam power. So those ships will have a slight edge or advantage, if you will, when it comes to some of these wind directions. Okay, for example, the first advantage that oars and steam power gives you is you can basically turn before you start your movement, because just like in Black Seas, you turn after you make each move step. The other advantage is when you incorporate the full wind rules, no matter what the wind direction is, you can always move up to what would basically your battle speed, right? Just what would be battle sails in the Black Seas game, your battle speed here, as opposed to full speed. Which means that you can actually, because you're oared or steam powered, you can go into the wind without having to worry about tacking like you would if you only have sails. Okay, at battle speed, that's a pretty big advantage. Right now, the dwarves and I forget the actual name of their undead kind of army. Both of those have those types of capabilities. All right, so that's the basics of the wind differences. The other key piece of when you activate a ship, one very distinct difference, though, is you must turn your ship before you fire, unlike in Black Seas where you can do it in either order. A similar difference will be when it comes to you have in Black Seas you've got anchored, light, medium, light, battle, and full sail. Here you've got anchored, light speed, battle speed, and full speed. However, whereas in Black Seas you cannot make a turn when you go full sail, here in Armada you can make a turn after your third step at full speed. So you still maintain your maneuverability even if you're going very fast. So small difference. If you see it in a bat rep, if we happen to do one, notice that it's not a mistake. If you do happen to play Black Seas and you want to watch an Armada bat rep. When it comes to in the movement space, evading and colliding are handled a little differently. it's subtle enough where it can throw you if you play Black Seas. So in the case of evading, it's almost exactly the same, the mechanics, okay? But they're very specific here. The active ship, when it's doing an evasion during that move step, it cannot do a fire as she bears, which is part of the base rule set, and she cannot fire her cannons if she made an evade attempt that activation, okay, in that step. Now, if the active ship can complete its move, any move steps after the evasion attempt, those you can fire on. But you're at a penalty. There's a modifier to shooting if you had to evade during a previous movement step, that activation. We'll cover that in the shooting rules. What's interesting in this case, whereas in Black Seas, when you try to evade, if you're successful, you either stop just short of the ship you're trying to evade with, or if you're able to continue through it the rest of your move and go past the ship, you do that and then turn. In Armada, instead, you stop just short of the ship, then turn and finish that move step, and then continue from that point with any additional move steps you have. So I kind of like that rule a little better, and it's very possible, or at least I'm hopeful, I guess, that mechanic will make it into Black Seas. I do like that. It makes it more cinematic when you're actually looking at the models and you evade it, and your ship actually does change course as a result. Makes a whole lot of sense. Again, it's a skill test. The skill tests are the same in Black Seas as in Armada. Now, colliding is, I would call it simplified. There is no chart. Both ships automatically, just at a base, they roll a d10, and that's the damage they'll inflict on the opponent's ship. Now, there are additional damage done for each size difference, size step. So there's the same 5 sizes: tiny, small, medium, large, and extra large. And for every size step you are larger than your opponent, the ship you're colliding with, you will do an additional d10 of damage to that. So 2 mediums will do 1d10 to each other. A large will do 2d10 to a medium, or 3d10 to a small. Okay. Now, in the case of a small hitting a large, for example, you still do the 1d10, because that's the base. The only modifier is if you're tiny. The tiny ships will do essentially a d10 divided by 2. That's how you determine colliding. It's very, very straightforward, which I kind of like. I noticed that in Black Seas, when we did collisions, we always seem to forget that if you moved more than 8 inches in your current or previous activation, you do an extra 3 damage. So this simplifies it, even though I think the Black Seas mechanic is a little truer when it comes to the amount of damage inflicted because of speed. Now, what's really interesting with the collisions of in Armada is that if you actually collide, your move stops right then. At that point, there is no you can't do anything more. There's no future movement steps you can take. It ends at that point. So you're not even grappling, because upon collision, the activating ship ends its turn. So usually it's move, and then after your final move you grapple, and after a grapple and boarding action, then you end your turn. So here, collision actually has a greater impact. The shock of the impact disorganizes the crew enough where they can't even attempt to grapple or board. The one other thing that happens as a result of a collision is both ships will reduce their speed, declared speed, by 1. So if you're going to battle, you'll go down to steady. If you're at full, you'll go to battle. If you're at steady, you'll go to anchored, just from the force of the collision slowing you both down. So there is a change in speed immediately. So that will affect how much you can move or change your speed the next turn, right? So if you were going steady and you wanted to go battle next turn, but someone collided with you, you're pushed to anchored, you can't go battle next turn, right? Because you can only increase 1 step at a time. All right, so on to shooting steps. there's some differences here as well. The biggest difference that's going to be the hardest to get used to if you play Black Seas is the two hits are flipped. So in Black Seas, you try to hit. So you start on five or less to hit, and all your modifiers modify the number to hit, bringing it down. To, where ones are critical always, tens are always misses no matter what, and you just need to roll the number or less. Well, in Armada, you have to roll a 6 or greater, and tens are crits and ones are always misses. And all the modifiers are applied to the roll of the die, not the target number. So it's the same penalty. The penalties look very similar. Veteran crew, it is a plus to hit. Well, you plus to the die instead of plus to the target roll. So it's a little tough to get used to, but I'm sure with experience and practice it'll be relatively simple. But if we do film it, forgive us if we do make those simple mistakes there. Okay, arcs are really straightforward in this. Matter of fact, as you saw in the earlier piece where you're showing the components, there is the arc for the bow arc. Just you line that up with the template, the base of the ship, and it's very straightforward. It's very clear, and it's always the same. It's basically a 60-degree arc. Now, what's interesting with the broadside in this game is instead of it being the length of the hull, it's the length of the full base. So it's a little bit longer than the hull, which is not a problem. It's just that it gives you a nice clear boundary. You can actually put a straight edge right up to the base of the ship's base, and you get a perfect 90-degree angle. You can tell whether something's lined up with the arc or not. And as far as modifiers for shooting, they're very similar. There are fewer modifiers, but there's some of the similar ones. Crew experience matters, whether you're partially in the arc or fully in the arc. When I say partially, I mean less than 50% in the arc. If the ship is anchored when it's firing, there's a bonus there. But in this one, if the shooting ship or the target ship is anchored, it's easier to hit, which I kind of like. It makes a lot more sense. You should get a benefit kind of in both directions. I do think maybe you should be a better one, more advantageous if you're anchored and you're firing, but you definitely should get a bonus for firing an anchored ship since it's not moving. But that's just me. And again, here's a new one here. If you rolled to make an evasion during your activation previously, and you're firing that activation, you're -1 to hit there. So it's a nice little addition. Now crits are same concept except here on 10s, but critical hits are actually there's only one table. There's no aiming high, aiming low, and it's just similarly a roll of D10. I'll go ahead and read off what the actual possibilities are here because they're very, very simple. The first crit, on a roll of 2 or 3, because you roll 2d6, and it could be an engine or sail critical hit, which basically you do additional damage, reduce the current speed, stuff like that. You can actually, if you're already anchored or grounded and you can't reduce speed, you take more damage. 4 to 5 is major structural damage, so you do d6 plus 1. 6 to 8 is minor structural damage, doing d3 plus 1. Major structural damage is 9 and 10, taking d6 plus 2 again. And then crippling damage in 11 or 12, you essentially take d6 plus 4 damage, put a blaze marker, that's like the fire, and then you go through regular fire effects. So essentially critical hits here don't necessarily affect the way the ship operates. It adds damage. That's what critical hits really do in this particular game, which nice and simple and keeps it very straightforward as far as the play goes out. Okay, rakes are exactly the same, but what's really nice in the rule book, they provide some really nice examples that make it very clear what counts as a rake and what doesn't. So kudos to the rule writers with the illustrations on that one. All right, now remember the ship cards have a ship points and a nerve value. Well, that comes into play a little similarly, but a little different from striking the colors in the Black Seas. So just as in Black Seas, where you got that strike value, once you exceed it, drop below, Here, the nerve value, as soon as you exceed the nerve value, your ship is considered crippled. Now, a crippled ship in this game, it's really nice. You don't actually automatically strike colors here or surrender in this case. Your ship, when it's crippled, it ends up behaving. Basically, it's half strength as far as shooting, and the crew value is reduced, and so you're not as effective at shooting or boarding actions because your ship's crippled. Okay, now, in this case, when you're crippled, you don't automatically surrender or roll to surrender like you did in Black Seas. Instead, the only time you need to do that is if you activate within 10 inches of an enemy's non-surrendered ship, whether it's crippled or not. So, if you're far enough away from the opponent, and you're crippled, you don't have to worry about surrendering, and you have a chance to maneuver further away so you can stay alive longer, and you also have a chance of repairing, getting that damage value down below the nerve, and restoring yourself. So it's a little less likely to surrender in this game than it is in the Black Seas, but still, it's a mechanic. Now, a surrendered ship stays surrendered, and it doesn't take part in the battle just like in the other one. It can also be collided with. Now, ships are destroyed a little differently in this game. If the ship reduces or takes enough damage that it equals or exceeds its structural points, it's gone. It's removed from play. It's sunk immediately. It doesn't stay on the board. However, if you lose if you're reduced to, you take the additional damage to equal your structure points or crew, actually get rid of your crew to 0, and that's how the ship is destroyed. It stays in play, so it can be a wreck. Now, every turn you'll roll to see if it sinks or explodes, but it stays in play is a shipping hazard for at least a couple turns. So it's a nice little mechanic to make it add a little more tension to the game, kind of like that. Now, boarding actions are kind of simple. I guess they're presented more simply here, I think. You grapple the same way as a skill test, like you would. Then, now you have that crew rating. And the crew rating tells you how many D10s you roll in close combat and boarding actions. And just like the shooting, the to hits are flipped. So, you have a 6 or better to hit, period. +1 if you're a vet, -1 if you're inexperienced. +1 if you grappled that turn, and -1 if you're crippled, I think it is. So here's what it looks like. So these are the very simple modifiers, and it's just like the Black Seas. It continues. If the ongoing boarding actions, they happen each turn. Now, just like in Black Seas, you can go ahead and try to disengage or fight. You can't do both. It's one or the other. What's interesting with multiple grapples, things are done differently. When you, as the grappled ship of when there's multiple ships grappling you, you can split your dice to attack multiple ships, or you can focus on one. Okay, so that's kind of how that is. That's divided up. So it's very similar to the Black Seas version. Firing at grappled ships is very interesting. In this case, unlike in Black Seas where both ships take the damage, here you have to make a skill test, pass a skill test, to fire at a grappled ship. Now, if you pass, you fire, and you split the damage evenly, with critical hits only going to, with criticals only rolled for the actual enemy ship, not a friendly ship. So that is a slight difference, which I think is pretty good. Terrain rules are very, very similar. The only difference is islands and shorelines have an extension of 2 inches around it. So instead of 3 inches in Black Seas, it's 2 inches in this game. So you can collide and get grounded just like you can in Black Seas, and take damage. But the islands and shorelines only extend 2 inches to the 3. There is another type of terrain. It's one of these. Let me get the marker out, or not the marker, but the actual terrain piece. Here, let me show you. They've got rocks here. Now, rocks are different in that you cannot evade them. When you go to collide with those, there's no shoreline involved. You crash into it, you cannot evade, you are automatically collide and take damage. And that's pretty significant damage whenever you collide, of course. Alright, so that's basically the rules differences. Building a fleet is very similar to Black Seas, except the points are printed on the card, and so the point values are much lower. You're playing with 100 points or 500 points. You're not doing a navy of 1,000 points, 2,000 points, or 1,500 points. And of course, you buy upgrades. There's several standard upgrades, and there's a list of magical upgrades. And the magical upgrades can only be applied one per fleet and one per ship. So, and only on the main battleships. Remember, I mentioned there's two different types of ships. So there's support and main battle. Main battles can only have one magic upgrade assigned to them, and that magic upgrade can only be found once in a fleet. Standard upgrades, though, just like in Black Seas, the size of the ship determines how many standard upgrades or magical upgrades can take in combination. Now, what is also interesting, as I mentioned before, there's each faction has their own special, potentially special upgrades that they have access to, and magical upgrades they have access to. So again, same rules apply to upgrading the ships there. So I think that's kind of neat. What's interesting about building a fleet is there's two types, like I said, main battle and support, and you can only have up to 2 support ships per main battle ship you have. So you can't have just support ships. So you're kind of forced to balance your fleet a little bit more because support ships give you some special abilities that are can be game breaking, which is why they introduced this particular list building way, which is kind of the way they do it in Kings of War when you build armies. You can only take special units if you have a certain core unit or core size already in place. So very similar system. So that's really the differences between. So it's a very similar system. Should be very easy to pick up. And I do like the cards a little bit. I like them being a little bit bigger. And really, to be honest with you, you can stay tuned for a video coming up. We're going to talk a little bit about how we're using this game to add a naval side to Warlords of Erewhon. And we're going to basically use the rule sets here and the cards to create our own fleets, or fleet options, using also the ships in here as well as ships from other systems such as Uncharted Seas, which I don't think is currently supported, but you can still find the fleets out there, and they look great. It's roughly the same scale. And again, just like with Worlds of Erewhon, you can use other ship models you have. So a great system here to kind of add some flavor to other systems as well, a naval flavor, naval component. But that's a separate video. We'll stay tuned for that in the near future. And if you want to get into this, if you're into the fantasy side of naval battles, this is a good system, especially if you play Black Seas. Very easy crossover. And because it is much simpler a rule set than Black Seas in total, it is actually easier to learn as a system than even Black Seas was. So your fantasy naval battle guys are going to get into this a lot more quickly, I think. So that's the game. That's how it differs from Black Seas. Hope this was useful to you. Not certain how soon we're going to come out with actual bat reps. We're not going to do a naval lesson specifically for this one, but stay tuned. We might very well do bat reps because we'll get some of these ships painted up, and we'll just see what happens. All right, stay tuned. Other videos in the series, Hedgehog Naval Academy, and we'll see you next video. Bye-bye.